Hi, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for doing the interview.
So here's one. Let's go back to Earth and the Balance. The search for truths about this ungodly crisis and the search for truths about myself have been the same search all along. So, mark out of 10, how's the search for the ungodly crisis solution been? And mark out of 10, how's the search by yourself?
On the first, there is a new chapter in the climate story that is presented in this new movie, an Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. And the new chapter is that we have the solutions now. They're available, they're affordable, they make our lives better in multiple ways, and the only element now missing is sufficient political will
And we
to
have Trump.
deploy them as quickly as necessary.
And we have Trump.
And we have Trump, but no single person can stop this climate movement. As I say in this new movie, there is, for all of us who work on the climate crisis, an episodic struggle between hope and despair.
Yeah.
But despair is simply another form of denial. We don't have time for it. And hope is justified even though at times the search for it requires careful study. And that study has led me to an examination of these previous movements. The abolition movement, which began in England, the struggle for voting rights for women and equal rights for women, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the civil rights struggle in my country, and more recently the gay rights struggle. And indeed, all of those movements have presented the advocates with occasions for despair and fears that their goal would be unreachable, that it would be impossible. But as the late Nelson Mandela once said, it's always impossible until it's done. The late economist Rudy Dornbush once said, change takes longer than you think it will, but then it happens more quickly than you thought it could.
Okay.
And just if I could complete the thought with reference to the gay rights movement. If someone had told me 7 years ago that in the year 2017 gay marriage would be legal in all 50 US states and accepted and celebrated and honored by 2/3 of the American people, I would have said, well, I hope so, but what are you smoking? And yet, this change happened according to this exact pattern. It took a long time, but then it happened quickly.
So you think we're at a tipping point?
I think we are right at a tipping point for the climate movement because it has reached that stage where it is being resolved into that binary choice between what's right and what's wrong.
But it's been there for years.
Yes, it took longer than people thought it would.
Right.
But
And
now it's happening.
How big a setback is Trump, Tillerson, Scott Pruitt? I mean, right at the start of the film, you've got Trump saying Paris is a waste of time. What's Obama doing there? I've had it up to here with Al Gore. I mean, it's a big...
The Nobel Committee should take back the prize.
Exactly. It's a big setback.
Well, after 4 months, it's now clear that no one person can stop this climate movement. The courts have blocked some of his initiatives. The Congress has refused to go along with others. And we've seen a law of physics appear in the world of politics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The Indivisible movement in the US is an internet-based, self-organized movement that you perhaps have noticed in the news coverage of Republican congressmen going back to town hall meetings and seeing crowds 100 times larger than they expected, well organized, armed with facts, determined to change their positions. And slowly, one by one, some of these Republican members of Congress are changing their positions.
And how big will his fear of the midterms be in relation to that?
Well,
or do you think he's so kind of away with his own ego that he doesn't really think about it?
It's hard to predict, and he ran in some ways independent of the Republican establishment, though he has in large part embraced it now. Some observers believe that the elections next year could resemble the 1974 elections when Democrats gained 48 seats in the House. But I don't know. I do know this, that this movement will continue regardless of what he does.
You basically say that the lowest rung in the kind of moral hierarchy that you believe in is occupied by cynicism, short-range thinking, and cheap manipulation of images and slogans. Is that not how you won?
Is that how he won? Well, it's an approach that characterizes the politics of a lot of people these days. We saw it in the Brexit campaign in your country. We've seen it here in France, where it was rejected.
Thank God.
I hope it'll be rejected in Germany later in the year. It was narrowly rejected in Austria and in the Netherlands. So I think there is now evidence that antibodies are appearing in the body politic.
So that's part of your theory of action leading to counteraction?
Yes, and I won't claim credit for authoring that theory, but I see it appearing, yes.
I saw, you mentioned Brexit. I've watched the film. I mean, you're preaching to the converted, but I thought it was brilliant.
Thank you.
But you're basically saying that you're effectively saying Brexit was in large part caused by climate change.
No, I don't. I certainly don't say that in the movie. I have made some comments, and here is the line of dots that I do think connect to one of the causes of Brexit. I think the causes of Brexit, you are far more expert than I am, Alastair, but hyperglobalization has created a centrifugal force flinging jobs to low-wage venues, and more recently the emergence of intelligent automation, extending cognitive functions as well as physicality, has produced evidence that may overturn the 200-year verdict of economists, with evidence to back them up that automation has almost always created more jobs than it's eliminated. In the last few years, the new evidence indicates that may be changing with the addition of intelligence in a much stronger form. The combination of these forces has produced a stagnation of middle-income wages in many developed countries, and the rise of inequality of incomes and net worths, both in developed and developing countries. On a global basis, inequality is diminishing in gross, but within virtually every country it is rising, in part because the classic factors of production, labor, capital, natural resources / land, now is appearing in a different mix, because the role of technology plays such a much more prominent role that the owners of capital get a somewhat larger return from the productivity and profits resulting from these factors of production. And there's been regulatory and legal capture by elites in many countries, perhaps most of all in mine, and tax policies and other policies have...
Well, you've gone so far as to say your democracy has been hacked.
Our democracy has been hacked, yes, because of the encroachment of big money into the political process. This occurred in part because of a radical change in the information ecosystem. Beginning 500 years ago, don't worry, I won't belabor this, the printing press led to the emergence of an information ecosystem that gave individuals access to the knowledge previously reserved for elites, stimulated a wave of literacy, and slowly led to the rebirth of the ancient Greek dream of participatory democracy. And in the fullest flower of Kant's Enlightenment, the U.S. Constitution has served as a kind of brilliant piece of software to enable the regular harvesting of the wisdom of crowds. But in the last third of the 20th century, the addition of video to electronic communication glued eyeballs to the screen in the industry's phrase, and television became dominant at the expense of the print media. And all of a sudden there were gatekeepers patrolling access to the virtual public square, charging enormous sums of money for the privilege of entering this space wherein it's possible to communicate. That new development gave access preferentially to elites and to corporations that have recurring revenue streams, a portion of which they can use to dominate that public messaging. And it became one way instead of two-way, and the citizens became the audience, AKA the consumers. And politicians were given a new incentive, most of all in my country, somewhat less so in yours, to spend all their time begging rich people and special interests for money so they could pay for the television advertisements.
Yeah.
And this also produced an evolutionary pressure on the kinds of candidates that presented themselves for election. And people who thought that was kind of fun began to flood the space, and people who were really more motivated by bringing about creative policies to promote the public interest were less willing to go through that routine. But the third turning of this wheel is now in progress. The internet and social media are now beginning to challenge television. This year, for the first time, aggregate advertising revenue on the internet surpassed that on television. And
But that's still big money.
It's still big money, but it recreates the architecture of the print ecosystem in that individuals can gain access to it. It is two-way, indeed multi-way. And for all of its echo chambers and fake news and problems of various kinds, it is now beginning to give rise to reform movements that live and breathe on the internet, that indivisible movement that I mentioned, but many, many others. And so there is hope.
You say in the film that you feel the lack of progress, the failure, if you like, to have completely comprehensively won this argument as a personal failure, because you've campaigned on this for decades now, and yet still you're having to win basic arguments about whether man-made climate change is real. That surely shows you how far we've still got to go.
Well, I have candidly acknowledged in the movie there have been times when I felt it was a personal failure, but I do also take hope from
Was the biggest failure losing the election to Bush? Was that did you feel that as a personal failure? I know you won it, but
well,
did you feel that as a personal failure?
I think there were many factors involved, including there was something about the Supreme Court, if you could remind me. But no, I was referring mainly to the fact that it has taken longer than I thought it would. But it is now happening much faster than anyone could have imagined.
What's been the lowest point then on that journey? What's been the point at which you've just thought, I thought it would have been Trump's election. But actually what was interesting in the film, when you're watching the news of Trump being elected, you just you do seem just to sort of, oh, well, and then we've got to fight on. So what's been the low point?
Well, there have been many, but I think immediately of the Copenhagen conference, for which I had high hopes soon after Barack Obama's election. And the plan that I thought would work was to pass meaningful legislation in the first half of the year when Obama's mandate was strong, and then take that as a message to Copenhagen, and with the moral authority thus conferred, pull together nations around the world.
So why didn't that happen?
Well, it passed the House of Representatives, but then it went to the graveyard of many good ideas, the U.S. Senate.
And where big money is big.
Well, the rules empower a determined minority that is responsive to special interests, and I think that the complicated agenda Obama was pursuing during his first year also played a role. I think that the health care measure took much longer than he expected, and I think that they pulled back a little bit at a time when it might really have been possible to pass the Senate. But Copenhagen was a disappointment, of course.
You said in your kind of guide to the people that you train that one of the things they should do is persuade all policymakers and all parties and all leaders to put the climate crisis as their #1 priority.
Yes.
But they just don't.
Well,
I mean, look at our election now in Britain. I don't know if you're following it, but I mean, it's barely figuring.
Well, but look at the election that just took place here in France. Macron, with whom I met during the Paris negotiations, also did not mention it too much during his campaign, but immediately following the election, he made it the #1 priority and appointed Nicolas Hulot. He's presented policies that are truly visionary and inspiring and has announced that it's going to be the top priority. So this is genuine progress, and it's happening in other countries as well. China has reduced its emissions 3 years in a row, and they're going to start reducing them at a more rapid rate.
I
India.
enjoyed your exchanges with the Indian ministers in the film.
Well, just 2 weeks ago, India announced that within 15 years, all automobiles have to be electric vehicles. That's astonishing. And it's yet another sign that we are now seeing change take place at a pace no one thought could have been possible.
Is it possible to take your theory of action and counteraction, that Trump in a bizarre sort of way becomes an impetus for further speed on this?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Now, it's not the path I would prefer, but it could actually have that effect.
Just very briefly back to Brexit. The point you made about Brexit was the drought leading to the refugee crisis.
Yeah, there have been peer-reviewed scientific papers long since connecting this historic drought in the Eastern Mediterranean to climate-induced changes in atmospheric circulation. Without going into boring details, there's a great deal of confidence. One of the authors of, the chief reviewer of the main studies is at Imperial College in London. I went to meet with him. It's well established. But here are the consequences. Long before the civil war in Syria began, from 2006 to 2010, 80% of their livestock were killed by the climate-related drought. 60% of their farms were destroyed. 1.5 million climate refugees were driven into their cities where they collided with another 1.5 million refugees from the Iraq war. And WikiLeaks released internal conversations of the Syrian ministers saying this is going to cause an explosion. We cannot deal with this. And soon thereafter, the civil war, which had other causes as well, of course, erupted and opened the gates of hell. And the refugee flows, which also had other causes, began to shake the foundations of the European experiment. And of course, there were many causes of Brexit, some of which we discussed. But one of the most powerful advertisements in that campaign was the billboard showing the endless lines of refugees at the borders of Europe with the implicit message, do you want them coming here? And of course, it's a cheap and low message, but it's one that evokes responses that people have to understand.
You mentioned the Supreme Court, and I sensed a little bit of pain as you did it.
Oh, wow.
Is there any day that you don't think about that?
Of course.
When did you stop thinking about it on a daily basis?
Oh, not long thereafter.
Seriously?
Well,
that is not a kind of scar that just runs the whole way through you. I don't think you'd be forgiven if it was.
Honestly, no, and I'll tell you why. I had already experienced much worse pain. When I almost lost a child and came face to face with an unimaginable consequence that no one could even dream of dealing with, it changed me in a number of ways.
This is when your son was hit by a car?
Yeah. And I spent 30 days in the intensive care unit with him. And the story has a happy ending, I hasten to add. Complete and full recovery, thank God. But when you encounter the prospect of an unimaginable loss, it does change you. And when I later came back to the climate crisis, I found that I had changed emotionally in at least one very significant way. For the very first time, since it touched that place made raw, I felt something I'd never felt before. This beautiful and majestic God-given earth that we take for granted has conditions that have given rise to the flourishing of humankind, and those conditions could be lost. But I learned something else during that experience. People came up to me from all walks of life, elevator operators, waiters in restaurants, who had themselves gone through painful experiences and reached out to me. And it taught me a lesson that I actually repeat in the movie, not with any reference to my own personal experience, but after the terrorist attack in Paris, I was commenting on it, and I drew on my previous experience in saying that one of the secrets of the human condition is that suffering binds us together. And in the aftermath of my own searing pain, I came to realize not only what I mentioned about the global environment, but something about humanity that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know before, and that is that if you and I went out here and walked down the street, an unimaginable percentage of the people we pass will be walking with the burden of pain that we cannot imagine, cannot know, but they are going through it. And so...
But that's all fine, but you're the guy who, Hillary 5, you were the fourth who got more votes than the other guy, but...
Well, you're going back 200 years.
I am. That's how rare it is. That's how rare it is.
Yeah.
And you see, for the next 8 years, you've effectively, in the eyes of most people, many people, won that election. And these Supreme Court judges come along and take it away at the last minute. You have to make this concession speech, which I'm not sure many people could have made. You have to preside in the Senate over this stuff going on. And then you've got to watch 8 years of George Bush doing things that you wouldn't have done.
Alastair, I can't tell you how much fun it is to revisit all those experiences with you.
So that you wouldn't be human if that wasn't painful the whole time.
Oh, of course. But your original question on this line was, did I carry it with me every single day? And the answer is no, because I had been inoculated against despair.
Right.
But
you've been inoculated against despair by something that, as you say, eventually led to hope.
Yeah.
You can't have felt much hope during those 8 years.
Well, I felt gratitude for finding other ways to serve the public interest. And when I came here to Cannes 11 years ago, I discovered that movies can help to bring about change in a very powerful way. And the number of people that I meet around the world who come and say the nicest things about how they change their lives. I mean, literally the number of people who changed their lives because they had realized the stakes, the danger, and the need for action. And my greatest hope with this new movie here, premiering tonight, is that it will help push us across this social and political tipping point.
And how many times have you done the slideshow now?
Thousands.
Do you ever get bored?
No. Partly because I change it almost every day. I will admit that in these days here at Cannes, I haven't had a chance to go through it. But I brought my computer and my slideshow with me.
What, to add the freak weather stuff and bring it up to date scientifically?
Yes, and I have a personal staff of 10 people in Nashville, and one in Palo Alto, one in New York. And they work every day to help me interpret the latest science, the latest news, the latest business and technology developments. These solutions are emerging so rapidly now. You know, the latest contracts, fresh news for electricity from solar photovoltaic panels. 2 contracts just reached at a cost of 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. And in case you don't speak kilowatt hour, I will tell you that that is less than half of the cost of electricity from coal. And you know that just 2 weeks ago in England, the birth of the coal-powered industrial revolution, for the first time in 130 years, England went for a full day without burning any coal.
Is that true?
Yes.
England or Britain? Or part, are you sure it was
The
England?
United Kingdom as a whole.
Okay.
Scotland's gone many days, 100%. Well,
Scotland is a much better country than England in so many ways.
Well, I know that's your bias, and I will not disagree with it, but...
is that because your president's mother was born there?
Well,
No.
It's because some of my business partners were born there, and you know them.
I do. Mark, yeah. Actually, on that, the thing about the Pope,
Yes.
he's become a big, champion of the climate crisis and the need to take action.
Because of this Pope, I could actually follow Tony Blair and become a Catholic. I'm not going to, but honestly, I admire him so much. What an amazing, inspirational leader at the time when the world needs this.
But he does seem to take a slightly more scathing approach to the whole kind of capitalist model than you do. You believe that sustainable, partly the stuff you're doing with Mark and generation investment, you believe there is something called sustainable capitalism.
Yes, I do. I think that...
And what is that and how does that differ?
Well, first of all, I think that the rise of inequality and the other economic trends that we've discussed, and also the operations of capitalism in its modern form, emphasizing short-termism, ignoring negative externalities like pollution, and positive externalities like sufficient investments in education and mental health care and family support and all of that, the ignoring of the depletion of natural resources, the ignoring of the distribution of incomes and net worths. I think that it is creating some of the problems that we face. But democratic capitalism, this binary, this dual hegemonic ideology, is still, in my view, our best hope for the future if we reform both democracy and capitalism. And where capitalism specifically is concerned, we need to insist upon longer-term perspectives, which means longer-term incentive and compensation structures. We need to integrate sustainability into all aspects of capitalism. My partners and I in the business world, I spend most of my time on trying to solve this climate crisis, but this is part of that work as well. We have tried to prove the business case that the full integration of sustainability into the investment marketplace is a better way of investing and does provide better returns for your clients.
But David Blood, your kind of key partner, he had this phrase, long-term greed. Is it really that different? Is your business model really that different to the kind of business model that most people look at and think that's what's creating inequality in the world?
No, it is very different. One of the advantages of capitalism, if it's pursued in a reformed way, is that capitalism unlocks a higher fraction of the human potential with a set of ubiquitous organic incentives that reward hard work and ingenuity and investment. And that is an advantage, and it is more congruent with higher levels of personal, religious, economic, and cultural freedom. It sorts supply and demand, and it's at the base of every successful economy in the world for those reasons. But the long-term aspect of these incentive structures is the key, because looking at short-term trends can really lead to the misallocation of capital and serious mistakes, and we've seen an abundance of them. And by the way, the short-termism is in culture and in politics as well. And you've worked in the world of politics, as have I, and we have both seen politicians who pay so much attention to overnight public opinion polls and short-term public opinion polls. When, you know, after World War II, George Marshall famously said, "Now is the time to steer by the stars and not by the lights of each passing ship." And when we have the opportunity to build a public consensus that supports leaders who will take that long-term perspective, we can serve the public interest. And the same is true in the marketplace.
Right, but the...
Jeff Bezos of Amazon was quoted last week when he was asked the secret of his success. He said, you know, if you just plan 3 years in advance, you have a lot of competition. If you plan 7 years in advance, there's not much competition.
But you've been the politician and you know how hard it is to fight and win campaigns in that way. So,
yes.
I mean, is there I've been surprised reading a lot of the stuff that you've said and written that you seem more positive about Putin than I'd imagine you to be. Given that I think there's a real...
You've read a stray quotation, and
okay.
I know the one. No, I think he is not in any way a benign force in the world. I first met him when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen him and watched him and known him a little bit for a long time. And this is not a positive development in Russia at all.
You said something that you felt he took the environment seriously.
Well, no, I said that in his speech at the Paris conference, he made an excellent speech.
Okay.
And
has he delivered?
Well, not yet, but he has recently reaffirmed those views. And just 2 weeks ago, he said there is no longer any doubt that the future of energy is in renewables. And of course, their economy depends upon fossil fuels still. And so there's the kind of contradiction and irony that we see in many countries.
But just on him, you say that it's best if you can plan for the long term.
Yeah.
Because these non-democracies or pseudo-democracies, they can do it.
But
do you think the democracies in this, not just in the climate crisis, but generally, are the democracies now operating at a disadvantage to the non-democracies?
No, I don't agree with that. I understand the reason why some people have begun to express that opinion. One of the main reasons is the success of China. But I remember in the 1970s when there was a comparable sentiment about the success of Japan Incorporated and their unique approach to combining business and government, and they seem to be really beating the entire world. But there are fatal flaws in any non-democratic system of self-governance, in my opinion. 100 years ago at a county fair in England, there was a contest to judge the weight of an ox. Do you know this story?
Tell me.
The scientist came by and saw the contest and knew the person running it and persuaded her to give him all of the guesses. The winner was off by 100 pounds. But he collected all of the guesses and added them up and divided by the number of guessers, and the answer was within 3 pounds.
Right.
And this phenomenon, related to what we call the wisdom of crowds, has now appeared in multiple ways. I could give you other examples, but I won't.
Why has my country voted to leave the European Union then? This feels like a very unwise move to me.
Well, because they disagreed with you.
How dare they?
I also agree with you that it was an unwise move. But over time, I do think any system that collects the wisdom of crowds effectively is going to produce better decisions than any other approach. And I think,
do you avoid it, say with a Trump at the helm, how do you avoid it becoming a kind of mob mentality?
Well, we've already seen in the last 4 months that our other two branches of government, the courts, have blocked his immigration ban. The Congress has refused thus far to go along with his health care proposals. A lot of the things that his wall is unlikely to get built, and There are plenty of examples where the checks and balances in our
So
system.
you're confident, not just about the specific fight you're fighting on the climate crisis, you're confident that the American system will hold up against anything he throws at it?
I would substitute the word hopeful for confident because I think the degradation and the conversation of democracy and the hacking of democracy presents a new set of risks that are daunting. The system of checks and balances can work, but only if the people who are in these institutions rise to the challenge. And that remains to be seen. I'm hopeful that they will.
And just on Putin again, it surprises me how, quotes, ordinary Americans don't seem more aghast at the idea that the Russians directly got themselves involved in your election.
Me too.
So what is that about?
Well, I think it's partly about Fox News and the alternate reality that is constructed and maintained by a monolithic conservative / wealthy elite force that has dug in and wants to present and maintain an alternate reality in which the climate crisis is not real and these other things are imaginary and non-existent threats are lifted up.
So are those people beatable in the end?
Yes, I think they are. Let me draw an analogy where the climate crisis is concerned to what happened with the tobacco industry. Decades ago, when the doctors and scientists produced the consensus that the smoking of cigarettes causes lung cancer and other diseases, the tobacco companies spent a lot of money. They hired actors and dressed them up as doctors and put them in front of television cameras with a script on the teleprompter to say, "Hi, I'm a doctor, and I smoke cigarettes myself, and there's absolutely no problem." You can go on YouTube and look them up. They're astonishing. And they spent far more money than the medical community could ever come up with to combat them.
How do they get away with it? How have the Koch brothers got away with the stuff they do?
Well, by adopting the precise playbook and blueprint taken from the tobacco industry. There's a wonderful book called Merchants of Doubt, written by Naomi Oreskes and Mark Conway, that goes through this chapter and verse. There have been other studies showing it as well. They hired some of the same PR people. Not everyone in PR is unethical, but they hired some of the same PR people to do the same thing. And they hired these pseudo-scientists, and it's a major cottage industry now, to fund climate denial. And of course, one of our greatest journalists 100 years ago, Upton Sinclair, wrote, "It's hard to convince a man of something if his salary depends upon him not understanding it." And the large carbon polluters are trying to extend their present business plan, just as the tobacco companies did. Eventually, it caught up with the tobacco companies, and there were lawsuits, and they were required to finally finance the positive advertising campaigns to stop young people from taking up smoking. My organization, the Climate Reality Project, hired the people who developed the so-called Truth Campaign that's been historically effective in stopping teen smoking. And the same thing is going to happen with the carbon polluters. Martin Luther King once said, "No lie can live forever." That's still true.
But we don't know that it's true ad infinitum. We don't know that we might end up in a period of history where something comes along that ceases to be true, make that true. And I worry that Trump is that
You're saying this time is different.
I'm saying it might be. I'm saying I don't know.
Well,
I'm saying I love your confidence and your optimism.
Well, we're not really disagreeing at a deeper level, because the central question remaining to be answered is, how quickly will we reach this tipping point? How quickly will we solve the climate crisis?
Sum up Obama, 8 years.
Oh, you know, I think that he was extremely successful. I like him and admire him.
Sum up the Bush 8 years. You said some very harsh things about Bush.
Well, I think that the war in Iraq was, to this day, the most serious strategic and foreign policy mistake in the history of the United States. I'm sensitive not to appear to continue piling on because it's so obvious now to everyone that this was a great, great tragedy.
So for you, that completely defines George Bush?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think he also did some really admirable things. His campaign, his efforts to more effectively combat HIV/AIDS in Africa is something he deserves a lot of credit for.
And were you surprised that we got so involved with the Iraq situation?
Yes.
And does that define? How much does that define Tony for you?
Well, you're the expert on Tony, and not me. I love Tony Blair. I told him when I saw him soon after that decision, and I don't think it was necessarily the politic thing for a friend to say. I said, Tony, I would not have done that to you. And
had you been president, you mean?
Yeah, and I suddenly realized that I shouldn't have said it to him as a friend because, of course, he's not going to process and interpret that the same way I did. But yes, I think it was a mistake, and I'm sorry that he made that mistake. I understand why he did, but I think it was a mistake.
And
But it doesn't sum him up.
No, but when you are even accepting that you don't wear this scar every day, what your daughter called the heartbreak of a lifetime. Is Iraq the single biggest thing that might have been different had you been president rather than George Bush? Or do you think there could have been other things? Well,
I like to think that our approach to the climate crisis would have been very different. But who knows? We can't run the experiment, can we? Alas.
And you don't. Honestly, you can hand on heart, Tommy, you don't lie awake at night in hotel rooms in Cannes, sometimes thinking what the counter-narrative might have been. You just get up and go.
No, I really don't. Should I?
I don't know. I think you'd be very odd if you didn't every now and then.
Well, I don't. And here's why. I really feel that it is an amazing privilege to have work that justifies every ounce of energy and thought that I can put into it. I don't have time I mean, really, I don't take time, don't have time to go back and think about what could have been. What's the point of that? I'm working full out to try to help get us across this tipping point. The stakes are unimaginably high. Even now, it's hard for me to get my mind around how big this challenge is and how consequential our response is. But I'm excited and joyful to be able to do this work. It gives me more energy than I can pour into it.
No, I love the film.
Well, thank you so much.
No, I really did.
Happy to hear that.